A lost German Shepherd puppy starts following a lonely man, desperate for help. As he uncovers the puppy's heartbreaking secret, the man's hardened heart begins to break, leading to a powerful journey of healing, hope, and an unbreakable bond that changes both their lives forever. Before you scroll away, people watch my videos every day, they enjoy them, but it's like the subscribe button is their enemy. Come on, hit that subscribe button. It's free, and you'll get a heartfelt blessing. The rain had been falling steadily since dawn. The streets shimmered with reflections of blinking red lights and storefront neon, the city holding its breath in the gray hush of a late afternoon storm. Jack pulled his coat tighter as he crossed the street, his boots splashing through puddles as cold wind whipped at his collar. He was heading home after another long shift at the garage, his hands still stained with grease, his shoulders sore from bending under hoods and tightening bolts. All he wanted was a hot shower, and to forget how quiet his apartment had become. Jack didn't see the puppy at first. It was the faint sound that stopped him, a soft, barely audible whine. He turned, thinking maybe it was just the wind moaning through a drain or a trick of the rain. But there it was again, a tiny, pitiful sound. He scanned the sidewalk, eyes squinting through the curtain of water. Then, from behind a row of trash bins, a small shape emerged, soaking wet, trembling, and heartbreakingly small. A German Shepherd puppy. Its fur was matted with mud, its ribs slightly visible beneath its damp coat. The poor thing looked like it hadn't eaten in days. It limped slightly as it took a few hesitant steps toward him, as if unsure whether to trust him or flee. Jack blinked. He wasn't a dog person, never had been. Dogs reminded him too much of the past, of things he didn't talk about, didn't think about. But something about this one gave him pause. It wasn't just the way it looked. It was the eyes. Those eyes weren't just scared. They were desperate. "Hey, buddy," Jack said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. "You lost?" The puppy took another step forward, then stopped. It tilted its head, ears flicking, as if it recognized something in Jack. Then, without warning, it darted forward, not to attack, but to collapse. It curled up at Jack's feet with a heavy, exhausted sigh. Jack stood frozen. Water pooled around the little creature's body. It looked up at him once more, eyes pleading. Then something happened that Jack didn't expect. The puppy lifted one paw and lightly tapped his boot, as if to say, "Please." Jack's heart twisted. He knelt slowly, reaching out a cautious hand. The puppy didn't flinch. It leaned into his touch. The moment his fingers met that soggy, matted fur, something cracked inside him. He didn't know what made him do it, but suddenly his jacket was off, wrapping the shivering bundle. He scooped the puppy into his arms and stood up, the weight surprisingly light. "You're coming with me," Jack muttered, and he wasn't sure if he was talking to the pup or himself. By the time Jack reached his apartment, both of them were soaked. The puppy hadn't made a sound since he picked it up, only rested its head against his chest as if it had finally found what it was looking for. Inside, Jack set the puppy on a towel and began gently drying it. The little thing barely moved. As Jack ran the towel across its back, he noticed something. Scars. Faint, old ones, around the neck, behind the ears. Too deliberate, too cruel. "Who did this to you?" Jack whispered, his hands pausing mid-motion. The puppy opened its eyes and stared at him again. That look, it undid him. He stood up abruptly and walked to the kitchen, grabbing a can of tuna, the only thing he had that wasn't microwavable junk. He dumped it into a bowl and brought it over. The puppy perked up at the scent but waited, eyes flicking between Jack and the food. "Go on," Jack said. And then, slowly, the puppy began to eat. Not like a greedy animal starved beyond sense. but with small, grateful bites, pausing every few seconds to glance at Jack, as if afraid this was a trick. Jack sat down across from it, resting his elbows on his knees. For a long time, he said nothing. Just watched the small creature that had followed him, as if knowing Jack was the only person who would stop, the only one who might care. That night, the rain didn't stop. It hammered the windows as Jack sat on the floor with the puppy wrapped in an old blanket beside him. The silence in the room felt different now. Not empty, but full of something new, something living. He reached out and scratched gently behind the puppy's ear. "I should call you something." The puppy looked up, ears perked. "Rain?" Jack offered, but shook his head. "Too obvious." He studied the pup. "How about Chance?" A pause. "Because maybe you're mine, and maybe I'm yours." The puppy wagged its tail once. Jack chuckled, the sound foreign on his tongue. "Chance it is." But just as Jack was starting to let the warmth creep in, to let the moment soften the edges of his tired heart, something happened. Chance got up. He walked to the door, sat down, and began to whine. Jack frowned. "What's wrong?" Chance whined again, louder this time. Jack stood, puzzled. He opened the door. The puppy looked back at him, and then walked out. Not like he was running away, more like he wanted Jack to follow, and something deep in Jack's gut told him this wasn't over. Not yet. Jack hesitated in the doorway, watching the little puppy disappear into the misting rain. The street was nearly silent now, save for the occasional hiss of tires on wet pavement. Chance had taken off down the sidewalk with purpose, not like a dog chasing a scent, but like a guide who knew where he was going. "Chance!" Jack called out. The puppy stopped, looked back, and whined softly, then kept going, tail low but moving. Jack grabbed his coat, locked the door behind him, and followed. He didn't know why he was doing this. Maybe it was guilt, maybe curiosity, or maybe, deep down, something in Chance's eyes had stirred the part of Jack that had been buried beneath loss and regret for years. The streets darkened as they turned off the main avenue. Chance led him through alleyways and under sagging fire escapes, past shuttered businesses and dumpsters. Jack kept close, his boots echoing off the wet concrete. Twice, Chance looked back, waiting for him to catch up, and each time Jack found himself quickening his pace. "Where are you taking me, kid?" Jack muttered. Finally, they reached a run-down lot behind a condemned warehouse. The fence was half collapsed, rusted chain link twisted like wire bones. Chance stopped at the edge, sniffed the ground, and let out a soft growl. Jack approached cautiously. Behind the fence, he saw it, an overturned crate, a tattered blanket soaked through with rain, and beside it, movement. 3 more puppies. They were smaller than Chance. 2 black and tan, 1 pale with floppy ears. All were shivering, weak, and quiet in that haunting way that spoke of too many cold nights and too little food. Chance trotted over to them and gently nosed each one, as if reassuring them. He let out a soft yip and looked at Jack. Jack's breath caught in his throat. You weren't lost," he whispered. "You were looking for help, for them." He climbed over the fence carefully, ignoring the way it scraped his hands. As he knelt beside the crate, the puppies huddled closer together. Jack could see their ribs, could smell the sickness in the air. One had a gash along its leg, caked with mud and blood. "How long have you been out here?" he asked quietly. Chance sat beside him, tail curled around his body. His eyes never left Jack. It was clear now. Chance had survived long enough to find someone who might listen, who might care. He hadn't followed Jack out of desperation. but out of hope. Jack looked at the crate again. These pups wouldn't make it through another night out here, and he couldn't walk away, not anymore. He took off his coat and began wrapping the weakest pup in it. "All right," he said to Chance. "Let's get your family out of here." Back at the apartment, Jack turned the heat up as high as it would go. He lined a cardboard box with blankets and gently placed the pups inside, one by one. Chance hovered beside him, licking each of their faces before curling up beside them like a little guardian. Jack moved through his kitchen like a man possessed, warming broth, cutting up whatever scraps he had, crushing dog biscuits he'd bought on impulse earlier that week. He fed them by hand, whispering to them like they were made of glass. The one with the wounded leg whimpered in pain. Jack knelt and carefully examined the gash. "You need a vet," he murmured, and something about the way he said it made Chance tilt his head. "But I can clean this up for now." He boiled water, found an old first aid kit, and did his best to patch the wound. The pup flinched but didn't bite, just watched him with wide, frightened eyes. "You're all right," Jack said gently. "You're safe now." That night, sleep didn't come easily. Jack lay on the couch, listening to the soft breathing of the 4 puppies curled up near the heater. Chance had taken a spot just under the coffee table, eyes half closed, ears still alert. Jack stared at the ceiling. He'd been alone for years now, ever since the accident. Ever since he lost his brother, a police officer who died in the line of duty. The grief had hollowed him out. He'd shut people out, shut life out. Moved away, changed jobs, drifted. But now, a soaking wet puppy had crashed through all that grief like a wrecking ball. He looked over at Chance. "You're not just a dog, are you?" he said softly. "You're a sign." Chance opened his eyes and wagged his tail once. Jack chuckled. "Guess I'm stuck with you now." The next morning, Jack made calls. He found a small local rescue group, run by a kind woman named Lydia, who agreed to meet him that afternoon. When she arrived, Jack opened the door to see her standing with an umbrella, her expression warm and curious. He motioned her inside. "They're in here." When Lydia saw the puppies, she knelt beside the box and gasped. "Oh my God, they're just babies. Found them behind an old warehouse," Jack explained. "This one," he nodded to Chance, "led me there." Lydia looked at Chance, who wagged his tail cautiously. She extended her hand, and Chance sniffed it before giving it a lick. "He's got a good soul," she said. "You can tell." Jack smiled faintly. She stood and looked at him. "I can take the others. We've got fosters. But what about him?" Jack looked at Chance. The puppy had settled next to his foot, like he belonged there. "I think he already decided," Jack said quietly. "He stays." Lydia smiled. "Then he chose well." As she left with the other puppies, Jack stood in the doorway, with Chance beside him. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking. Jack knelt and scratched Chance gently behind the ear. "You knew what you were doing, didn't you? You found someone who wouldn't turn away. You found your way home." Chance licked his face once, then leaned into his chest. And that's when Jack felt it. Not just warmth, not just gratitude. Tears, real ones. Because for the first time in years, he wasn't alone anymore. The apartment was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet Jack had grown used to over the years. It was a living quiet now. The gentle rustle of Chance shifting in his sleep, the soft patter of rain fading on the windows, the echo of new breath in a space that had felt like a tomb. Jack sat at the table with a cup of coffee growing cold between his hands, watching Chance sleep in the worn-out dog bed he'd bought from the corner pet shop that morning. It was a little too big, but Chance didn't seem to mind. He lay curled in the center of it, his tiny chest rising and falling steadily. A knock at the door startled them both. Chance was on his feet in an instant, a low bark rising in his throat. "It's all right," Jack said, getting up. "Easy, buddy." He opened the door to find Lydia standing there again, a clipboard under her arm, and a wide grin on her face. "I thought I'd check in," she said. "Make sure you hadn't been completely overrun." Jack stepped aside to let her in. "We're still standing." Chance wagged his tail, cautiously stepping forward to greet her. "He looks better already," Lydia said, kneeling down to rub his ears. "You've taken good care of him." Jack shrugged, but a small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "He's easy to take care of, just wants to be close." Lydia looked up at him, her smile softening. "And you're okay with that?" He paused, then nodded. "I didn't think I would be, but now I can't imagine him not being here." She stood, pulling a small folder from her bag. "Well, in that case, I brought the paperwork, if you want to make it official." Jack stared at the manila folder like it was made of something fragile. He reached for it slowly, then looked down at Chance. "What do you say?" he asked. "You ready to be stuck with me for good?" Chance responded with a wag of his whole body and a happy bark. Jack laughed and signed his name. The following weeks were a blur of new routines and small, unexpected joys. Morning walks in the crisp air, trips to the dog park, where Chance cautiously explored before diving into play with the bigger dogs. Training sessions in the hallway. Treats, accidents, progress. But more than anything, there was companionship. Jack started talking again, not just to Chance, but to people. The barista down the street, the old man who walked a terrier with a limp, Lydia, who stopped by every so often with updates on the other puppies. All three had been adopted. "They're doing great," Lydia said one afternoon. "You gave them a second chance. You gave all of them that." Jack looked down at Chance, who was asleep at his feet. "No," he said quietly. "He gave me one." But peace never comes without the shadows of memory. One night the wind howled outside the apartment windows, rattling the panes. Jack woke from a dream he hadn't had in years. The sirens. The call that shattered everything. His brother's voice on the radio, crackled, panicked, and then gone. He sat up, chest tight, throat dry. Chance was already there, resting his head on Jack's knee. "I'm okay," Jack whispered, though he wasn't sure he was. He looked into Chance's eyes and saw no fear, no judgment, just presence. Steady, loyal presence. "You're not a normal pup," he murmured. "You came when I needed someone. You stayed when I didn't deserve it." Chance nudged him, then climbed into the bed, curling against his side. Jack wrapped an arm around him, let the warmth soak through, and breathed, really breathed, for the first time in what felt like forever. It wasn't long before Jack realized he wasn't just healing. He was changing. He started painting again, something he hadn't touched since the funeral. At first it was just sketches of Chance in motion, bounding after a stick, sleeping with his head on the couch arm, gazing out the window like he was watching for someone who never arrived. Then came landscapes, then people, then memories, gentled through his hand, reshaped through color and texture. One day he painted his brother, not as he'd been at the end, but as he was when they were young, laughing, alive. He hung it in the hallway and stared at it for hours. Chance lay at his feet the whole time. But the past has a way of testing you just when you begin to feel safe. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon. Jack was working on a commission, his first in years, when Chance stood up suddenly, ears pricked. Jack looked up. "What is it?" Chance didn't bark. He just moved to the door and whined. Then Jack heard it. A distant cry, muffled, pained. He opened the door, and Chance bolted down the hallway, leading him down the stairs and out into the alley behind the building. That's where they found her. A young girl, maybe 7 or 8, crouched beside a cardboard box. Her hoodie was soaked through, her eyes red-rimmed. Inside the box was a small puppy, no more than a few weeks old, barely breathing. Chance let out a whimper and crept forward, sniffing the air. Jack knelt beside the girl. "Hey, it's okay," he said softly. "I'm Jack. What's your name?" She sniffled. "Maya." "Did you find him like this?" She nodded. "He was in the dumpster. I didn't know where else to go." Jack looked at her, this brave, scared kid who reminded him too much of himself, and gently reached into the box. "It's going to be all right," he said. And as he cradled the tiny body in his arms, he realized something deep and final. Chance hadn't just saved him. He had taught him how to save. Jack didn't hesitate. With the frail puppy in his arms and Maya by his side, he led them back through the alley toward his apartment. Chance walked ahead, pausing every few steps to look back and make sure they were still coming. Inside, Jack wrapped the puppy in a towel and laid him gently in a basket by the heater. His tiny body was trembling, and his breaths came in soft, shallow gasps. "Stay with me," Jack whispered, then turned to Maya. "We need to get him warm and fed. He's in bad shape." Maya stood silently, soaking wet, arms wrapped around herself. She looked like she hadn't eaten in a while either. Jack pulled out a sweatshirt and helped her into it. "You hungry?" She nodded. He made her a sandwich and warmed some soup. She sat at the kitchen table, eyes never leaving the basket. Jack placed a dish of warm water and a few drops of puppy formula near the pup's nose, praying he'd be strong enough to lick it. Chance sat beside him, watching. Maya looked up. Is he gonna die? Jack didn't answer right away. Instead, he knelt beside the basket again and reached gently under the pup's belly. His skin was paper-thin, ribs sharp like they'd been carved from bone. "He's a fighter," Jack said, "just like you." Maya looked down at her hands. "I'm sorry I didn't knock sooner," she whispered. "I just didn't know where else to go." Jack sat beside her. "You did the right thing. Coming here, that was brave." She looked over at Chance. "He found me, didn't he?" Jack nodded slowly. He always knows when someone needs help. That night, Jack gave Maya the couch and an extra blanket. She fell asleep instantly, curled up with one hand hanging down toward Chance, who had claimed the rug beside her. Jack stayed awake, watching the puppy's breathing rise and fall. He set alarms to wake up every hour, offering more formula and making sure the little body stayed warm. At 3:17 a.m., the puppy opened his eyes. Two watery, barely focused eyes that blinked up at Jack as if asking, "Where am I?" Jack blinked back tears. "You made it, little guy." By morning, Maya was still asleep when Lydia knocked at the door. She looked at Jack, disheveled, sleep-deprived, and then at the makeshift setup by the heater. "What happened?" she asked softly. Jack told her everything. The cry in the alley, Maya's arrival, the puppy barely clinging to life. Lydia crouched beside the basket. "He's tiny." "But he's alive," Jack said, voice breaking slightly. Lydia looked up at him. "You did good, Jack, both of you." Chance wagged his tail gently, as if he understood. "And the girl?" Lydia asked. Jack glanced toward the couch. "No parents. I asked. She didn't say much." Lydia nodded. "I'll see what I can find out. For now, let's focus on getting the puppy stable." They worked together, checking vitals, adjusting the heating pad, offering the smallest bits of food. By afternoon, the puppy was lifting his head. Weakly, but deliberately. Maya named him Twig because of how thin his legs were. "But he's gonna be strong," she insisted. "He just needs time." Jack smiled, just like the rest of us. The next few days were filled with a rhythm that reminded Jack of something long forgotten. Purpose. Real, bone-deep purpose. He walked with Maya and Chance every morning. She spoke more now, about her school, the foster homes, how she'd run away 2 weeks ago after another family didn't want her. "I didn't steal anything," she said one day. "I just wasn't quiet enough." Jack's hands clenched on the leash. "You're not the problem, Maya." She looked at him, not quite believing. "You deserve to be heard. You deserve people who listen." Lydia returned with a social worker named Denise, who gently spoke with Maya and eventually got her to open up. They agreed to let her stay with Jack temporarily under a community foster arrangement. Lydia vouched for him, said he was already changing lives, whether he saw it or not. Chance stuck by Maya's side constantly, at her feet during meals, napping by her backpack during tutoring sessions, even following her into the bathroom once, much to her loud protest. "He's worse than a shadow," she laughed. But her laughter lit up the room in a way Jack hadn't heard in years. Twig got stronger, too. Within a week, he was toddling across the floor, trying to chase Chance's tail. He was still frail, but his spirit was loud. Loud enough that Jack started sketching again. This time, not in black and white. He painted Maya and Twig curled up in a sunbeam. He painted Chance standing like a sentinel, watching over them both. He painted the alleyway, but instead of shadows, it was filled with gold. Lydia saw it and said softly, "You're not just healing anymore. You're giving others a way to heal, too." Jack looked at his little mismatched pack and smiled. "It's not just me doing the saving." One evening, as Jack cleaned up dinner, Maya sat at the table sketching with his colored pencils. She looked up and said, "Do you think people can change? Like, really change?" Jack set down the dish. "Yeah, I do, but not alone." She nodded slowly, then looked over at Twig, who was gnawing on a sock, and Chance, who watched with amused patience. "We changed each other," she said simply. Jack's voice caught. "Yeah, I think we did." That night, as the city lights blinked through the window, Jack stood at the edge of his life and looked back. A year ago, he had been a man barely holding on. Then a puppy found him in the rain. Now he was building something, no, rebuilding, with hands once too numb to try. Not just art, but family, trust, hope. Chance came to sit beside him, placing his head against Jack's leg. "You knew, didn't you?" Jack murmured. "You knew I needed to be saved before I ever did." Chance looked up at him, ears perked, heart open, and Jack, who once couldn't bear the thought of being needed, now realized how much he needed to matter. The morning sun spilled gently through the cracked blinds, casting warm stripes across the small apartment. Twig, now stronger and more playful, chased a crumpled paper ball across the floor, his tiny paws pattering softly. Maya sat at the kitchen table, coloring a drawing of a German shepherd and a little girl. She glanced up and smiled when Jack entered, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "Good morning," she said softly. Jack smiled back, feeling something shift deep inside him, a fragile but growing hope. "It's a new day," he said quietly. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of change. Maya was slowly opening up, supported by the kindness of strangers and a dog who never left her side. Twig, once a fragile puppy clinging to life, was now a beacon of resilience. Jack thought back to the night he found the pup, soaked, shivering, barely alive, and the scared little girl hiding in the shadows. Neither had spoken much then, but their silence was filled with shared pain. Now, their quiet moments together had grown into something much more. Trust, family, healing. That afternoon, Lydia stopped by with news. "Maya's foster placement has been approved," she said, holding a file. "You've done more for her than anyone else ever has." Jack nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "She's going to a great home, but she'll always have a place here, with you, Chance, and Twig." Maya's eyes widened, uncertain but hopeful. "I'm scared," she admitted. "But I want to try." Jack reached out and squeezed her hand. "You're not alone anymore." The day Maya left for her new home, Jack and Chance walked her to the bus stop. Twig, exhausted from the morning's excitement, rode in Jack's arms. Maya hugged them both tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saving me." Jack swallowed hard. "Number, you saved me." The bus pulled away, carrying Maya toward a future that once seemed impossible. Back in the apartment, Jack sat alone with Chance and Twig. The house felt quieter, emptier, but also filled with a deep sense of peace. He looked down at Twig, who nuzzled his hand. "We've come a long way, buddy," Jack said. Chance leaned in, resting his head against Jack's leg, steady and loyal as ever. For the first time in years, Jack allowed himself to imagine what life might look like moving forward, with friends, family, and a heart that had learned to love again. That night, Jack sat at his easel and began to paint. The canvas filled with light, golden rays illuminating a small girl, a German shepherd, and a man standing together, stronger because of one another. It was more than just a painting. It was a promise that no matter how dark the storm, hope could always be found. And sometimes it comes on 4 paws.